Hello everyone, this is mine, Jennifer Aguirre's, and Alexandra Rupp's historical trauma presentation. We decided to do it on an article pertaining to physical discipline within African American families. So the title of the article is called African American Families and the Role of Physical Discipline, Witnessing the Past and the Present. So the focus of this article is the use of physical discipline within African American families examined from a historical perspective within the context of institutionalized racism and racial disproportionality in the child welfare system. This article explores how the trauma rooted in slavery and maintained through institutionalized racism can influence certain African Americans' parenting approach to raising their families. And it ends up identifying the importance of culturally informed practices when assessing the use of physical discipline or potential abuse, especially within the child welfare system. This quote kind of conceptualizes what this article is about. It's a quote in the article. It says, "Instead of further pathologizing the African American community, this article will demonstrate that these disciplinary practices often originate from a place of family strength and love, historically used by Black parents to protect their children and socialize them to live safely within a dangerous society inherently plagued by institutionalized racism." So this is a pretty disturbing article and all, but this comic piece right here is kind of like something that relates to institutionalized racism. It says he's Black because that's how he was born. He's suspicious to the police because he's Black, just for that reason. He's pursued because he's suspicious. He is defensive because he's being pursued. He's shot because he's being defensive. And he's dead because he's Black. So, in relation to historical trauma, the article says African slavery in the U.S. In the early 1600s, slaves were brought to the U.S. and sold to their masters. Slave owners would restrain and bound, rape, emasculate, and dehumanize their slaves, and often use severe physical beatings to ensure compliance and submission from their slaves. So slaves mirroring the actions of their oppressors, the enslaved parents also use strong physical discipline to ensure their children adequately behave to escape the harsher and more dangerous punishment inflicted by the slave owners. And with this came with the enslavement came religious conversion in Christianity. So the masters indoctrinated slaves into the Christian faith. They manipulated doctrine to effectively manage control over slaves. This doctrine influenced disciplinary strategies and encouraged justification of corporal punishment. Beliefs and practices were passed on and assumed by later generations and continue to transpire today. So historical trauma continued. Post-Civil War through today. 1865, slavery abolition. Subsequently plagued institutionalized racist practices, even though slavery was abolished. For instance, in the sharing crop laws, which restricted legal and financial security, the Black Codes and the poll taxes, which marginalized civil rights and power, the Jim Crow laws, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, which kind of shows a demonstration here in the picture to the right, continued segregation, limited access to education, healthcare, social welfare programs, poor outcomes, and poverty. So, correlating discipline with child welfare in this article. 15% of children in the U.S. are African American, and yet they constitute 30% of children in foster care. Quote from the article says, "Disparities can occur when African American parenting tactics are misunderstood and wrongly labeled by community members and child welfare workers who are not appropriately assessing their use with the African American experience, but instead are judging these parenting tactics against inapplicable white middle class norms." And this little chart right here shows, it shows, like, for instance, you have to really pay attention to the numbers. If you look at the percent of U.S. kids in foster care, obviously the largest percent is 46%, and then it's is 46% whites, and then it's second is 36% blacks. But when you look at, obviously you have to consider the general population, like for instance in the US there's 60% whites, but there's only 15% blacks. Yet the percentage of how many children are in foster care are such close numbers, meaning the disproportionate rate is much larger in blacks when you're thinking of both the population percentage overall and the percentage of kids in foster care. If that makes sense, this is kind of just outlining the disproportionality of U.S. children in foster care by race, and the biggest disproportion is blacks. So, correlations to discipline and child welfare continued. History has shown that black children are more susceptible to become victims of violence, targeted or harassed by law enforcement, and or become involved in the criminal justice system compared to white children. Black parents have used discipline as a tool to foster focused and dutiful behavior from children so that they can gain the skills and diligence needed to overcome the barriers to success within educational and employment sectors that have historically denied them opportunity and advancement. Parents use disciplinary strategies to teach their kids lessons and consequences that align with their cultural and community context. So, the use of physical punishment may be normative parenting behavior with positive outcomes with some families and a sign of dysfunction in others, particularly if it is a sole disciplinary tactic. It is difficult to address many of these challenges imposed on African American children and families due to institutionalized racism because of societal resistance to acknowledge its role in many of the disadvantages African Americans face. However, despite these challenges, African Americans have developed adaptations, coping mechanisms, and survival skills to persevere and raise their families within an oppressive social structure. And this is our article, and that's the end. Thanks, guys.